Good afternoon, everyone, on this sunny Monday or snowy Monday in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us for today's Thought Leader Roundtable, a conversation on readiness. Today is a part of a regular series of explorations of the key questions of what does it mean for all young people to be ready for life's demands at every stage, and what is it going to take to get there? For the past several years, Karen Pittman, our co-founder, president, and CEO here at the Forum, has signaled that the day was coming when she would step out of organizational leadership and find more time. Today is the day that she shifts gears, stepping out of the president and CEO role and becoming a senior fellow here at the Forum. To mark this occasion, we've asked Karen to shift from interviewer to interviewee. And we've asked Merita Irby, co-founder of the Forum and Karen's colleagues for more than 25 years, to lead the discussion as Karen reflects on the paths taken and what's up next. We will be accepting questions and comments via the chat feature on today's session, which is available at the bottom of your screen. There may be a few slides, but the general focus will be on the conversation today. So please listen in and send in your questions as they come up. Lastly, today's session is being recorded. Later this week, it will be sent to everyone who registered and also posted to the Forum website, along with any additional resources that are mentioned on the call. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Merita.
Thank you, Ian. And we are absolutely delighted that you can join us today. Please use the chat and send us both questions and just say hi to each other. It already feels like a little bit of a family reunion. I'm seeing some Forum alumni there and some long-term partners, and we're just so glad that you can join us today. We are going to do, as promised, sort of a little reflection back and a thinking forward as Karen is making this shift. But before we dive in, I just want to ask Karen the number one question that I've heard posed to her over the past month, and it is basically this: are you really retiring?
Well, I wish there was a better word for it, but I am technically retiring, as Ian said. I'm retiring as president and CEO of the Forum. I am not retiring from the field. So whether we call it refiring or rewiring, as my friend Jane Quinn called it when she stepped aside, this really is not about leaving you all, but actually hopefully about being able to spend even more time thinking and writing and talking and listening to what you all are doing and trying to have more opportunities for actually sort of moving those ideas out. So this is not goodbye. So don't send me any presents. I'll leave it there.
Good. I know I was relieved when I heard that, so I just wanted to make sure folks heard that up front. So as you think about the path forward, we thought we'd just take a little time and reflect on the path so far. I know we talk a lot at the Forum about moving ideas to impact and what it takes to really do that, but sometimes it also just takes some time for the ideas to kind of form, to gel, to become those kind of powerful public ideas that really can change how people think. And I'm just curious, as you're reflecting back and just way back, think of to kind of early experiences, folks that you connected with along the way. What was the spark for your imagination that kind of started you on this path to where we are today?
Yeah, it's been a long path, and you are challenging me to go back in time, but I'm going to go back 50 plus years, probably even more than that if I go back to high school, and say that even though I didn't fully know it at the time, what put me on this journey was a combination of three things. One, really, really getting a good education, not just from being in the DC public schools, which is where I grew up, but from being in the DC public schools, from being in the DC Youth Orchestra, which was my youth development organization, and from being an active member in a Black church. Three very different settings for learning and development, but they were very compatible. I moved back and forth between them easily. And because of those, I actually had an opportunity that a lot of kids don't have to just go all over the city. I didn't go all over the country, but I went all over the city, and I ended up going to school and being in an orchestra with rich kids, poor kids, Black kids, white kids, kids of all ages. in the kind of learning environment that we talk about right now. I actually grew up in it. So that was the first thing. I really got a great full education in the way we think about learning and development as I came through mainly middle school and high school. The second thing is, because of that, I went off to Oberlin College. I got on a Greyhound bus with my trunk and went off to Oberlin College in 1969. And when I got there, what I found was that while people expected me to be smart and have potential, they were surprised that I was as well prepared as I was to be in a relatively elite private college, because I was a poor Black kid from DC who went to the DC public schools. And so they just didn't expect me to show up as well-rounded and well-prepared, and frankly, as well-spoken as I was. And that was curious to me because I had no evidence until then that I was not like everybody else. So I had to process that. We could talk more about that later if you want. But the third thing that happened was that I got recruited to be a camp counselor at what was then the High Scope Educational Camp for Teenagers, started by David Weichert and his wife. And those of you who know the forum recognize Weichert as the Weichert Center for Youth Program Quality. Started by Dave and his wife, who really were looking for an opportunity to bring their theories of active learning, not just into preschool, for those of you who know preschool and know the Perry Preschools Project, and the trajectory that that's had and the impact that that's had on us understanding the value of a quality early childhood experience. They knew that the same thing could really transform the lives of adolescents, but they couldn't get that into the Ypsilanti public schools. So they actually bought a camp and set up a camp for teenagers. And I actually just got recruited as somebody who wanted to be a teacher and spent my college summers basically learning to be an active learning coach for 70 or 80 young people, 12 to 18, ungraded, 8-week residential experience. And these were kids who were rich kids from France and Germany whose parents wanted them to practice English, to poor kids from Arkansas and the Mississippi Delta, and kids all in between coming together to build a learning community. So by the time I got to the end of college, I knew I had to have a huge commitment to learning and development. I knew I didn't fit in to go back to be a high school math teacher, which was what I thought I was going to be. And I basically then had to go chart a course to figure out where I took these ideas and move them forward. And that's essentially been what I've been doing for the past 50 years.
So I've heard you say the hop on the bus. You hadn't been to Oberlin before. You just kind of arrived on campus and had that experience. And years later, you started talking about that when you would talk about what it was like to not just help individual young people beat the odds, but what it took to really change the odds. And I know that's one of those kind of bumper sticker phrases that you have, changing the odds. And there's a lot of those over the years. This problem-free isn't fully prepared. Fully prepared isn't fully engaged. Ensuring all young people are ready by 21, ready for college. Don't laugh at me. Ready for college work of life. There's a lot
to remember them all. There's a lot of them.
There's a lot of bumper stickers, and so I'm curious, if you were to crystallize it, what is the essential idea that you've been working to move over the decades that you allude to?
You know, I think the essential ideas, as I looked around for where they land, really are embodied best in what we talk about as the positive youth development approach, which really is the sort of more sort of global language around what David Weichert was talking about when he was talking about active learning, which is basically to understand the science of learning and development. We now have the brain scans and neuroscience and all those things to help us, but it basically is understanding that our job as adults, even as young adults, is to help young people build the skills and competencies and capacities that they need to have to make meaning of their experiences, any experiences. And then if we can, to really help put enriching experiences in front of them so that they can even make more meaning and build more capacity. That's our job, is to really sort of feed fuel into this natural learning engine, which is what development is all about. And I think what I learned and what we're trying to do is, how do we help adults understand that? how do we help systems get out of the way of doing that? When you think about the joy that's on young people's face, and for those of you who go to the Ready by 21 national meeting, you probably remember a couple of years ago, I played the little video of my first grandson, there are now 2 of them, when he was just about 2 years old, when he was, talking about, I could do it all by myself, because he had learned how to climb in and out of his big boy bed. That joy and that self-learning and the things that we have to do to support that really should carry all the way through childhood and adolescence into young adulthood. That's what young people are wired to do. And I think the lesson is, the more we sort of get out of the way and really trust that our job is to develop relationships and create experiences in all kinds of contexts in which learning happens, so that young people are not moving towards a singular goal of graduating from high school or whatever, but they are moving towards youth success. And what we know youth success is, it's a combination of having a full range of competencies, a strong sense of agency, and an integrated identity. And getting an integrated identity is a challenge. Certainly it's a challenge in this day and age, but it's always been a challenge for young people who are anything other than, essentially white male. So we've got to really do that. And what we're learning, over time, is that doing that requires us to be much more cognizant of the power that all adults have in young people's lives, and giving them the tools to really recognize and use that power responsibly, and recognize and acknowledge the fact that the more they know and respect each other, the easier it's going to be for young people to navigate through that space. Again, I was able to test that out and see it in person, and see the transformation both in the counselors, who were not a whole lot older than the young people, because they were my age. I mean, at that point, they were 18 to 21-year-olds working with 12 to 17-year-olds. So it wasn't a big gap between the young people and the counseling staff. But the transformation that I saw consistently happen over an 8-week period for 4 summers convinced me that we know how to do this. And it doesn't take, a master's degree in teaching to do it. It really takes creating the kind of knowledge about the power that you have when you're intentional about creating learning experiences. That's what we know. How you get that into policy, how you get that into practice, how you get systems to dismantle themselves to let that happen, that's what takes a lifetime to figure out.
I was about to say, that seems to be the lifelong question, because I first met you and we first started working together. It's been 27 years ago. I know you like me to keep count. It's been 27 years ago this month, at the Center for Youth Development and Policy Research. And it was really about taking that positive youth development idea and thinking about what it took to move it at all levels. And then I'll say our next few years was a bit of circuitous path between the Center for Youth Development and the Forum for Youth Investment. Do you want to describe that a little, or like what were we trying to make happen during that time period, and how did that kind of land us at starting the forum?
Yeah, I'll take it back one step and then go through it really quickly. The Center for Youth Development and Policy Research came into being, Rita is the exact bearer of the dates, even when she wasn't there, but came into being in 2000, I think. No, I'm sorry, not in 2000, in 1990. Go back a whole decade.
I can prompt you on dates.
Came into being in 1990, basically because I had pushed these ideas as far as I could at the Children's Defense Fund. Now, I went to CDF in 1984, basically recruited by Marian Wright Edelman to head up their adolescent pregnancy prevention work, because she had basically come to the conclusion one morning reading the news when she saw 2 statistics. One, that half of the babies born to Black women in general were born to single parents, and that for teenagers, it was almost 90%. And she thought, what is this about? And the answer to this basically has to be more than contraception. So I need to find somebody who can figure out how to navigate these worlds of, sort of public health. The answer is, sex education and contraception, and this bigger idea, which in her head was hope. Like there's something going on here between having the actual technical capacity to prevent pregnancy and being motivated to do it. So she went off to look for somebody like me. She found me. I happened to be 8 months pregnant at the time, but she was patient and let me have Timothy before I came to I came to work. But what we were able to do there was really begin to bring the early kernels of this idea of capacity and motivation, that we really have to not just be solving problems, but making sure that young people are fully prepared. So problem free isn't fully prepared really came out of the work at CDF to figure out how to start to have a language that said, this is not just about telling young people to stop doing something. It's actually about giving them opportunities to figure out what they want to do and making sure that they are prepared to do it and that they've had a chance to practice and participate in that they see themselves as having agency. So that those ideas really got to take hold at CDF, but the policy agenda was still a deficit-driven policy agenda at the time. So that while at CDF we were able to say, wouldn't it be nice if all of these separate policies about dropout prevention, gang prevention, substance abuse prevention, you go all the way around what we used to call the donut, that all of those prevention policies that cut across the different agencies and departments, wouldn't it be nice to knit those together and really put them into a broader framework that talks about not just prevention, but development? That was a nice idea, and I got to write about it, but it was time to think about the policy. Marian very politely said, our policymakers are not ready for that. You go off and prove that we really can move policies that start with this idea of preparation and participation, and then CDF will come along eventually. So that's what I did. That's where the Center for Youth Development and Policy Research came from. How do we take these ideas that we know make sense in research and begin to really infuse them into policy? So when the opportunity to actually do that knitting inside of the federal government came along, I was perfectly happy running the Center for Youth Development and Policy Research with Michelle Cahill. I had hired Rita, probably she'll tell you how many months ago, not even years ago. She'd just been hired when the call came that said, okay, we got this idea of knitting together the programs across the federal agencies under some kind of an umbrella. We got that squeezed into the crime bill in 1994, which is why it ended up becoming the President's Crime Prevention Council. You know, you drew the short straw, you have to come run it. You asked for it, you got it, you need to come run it. And so that's where we got our first taste at, could we really set that table? And we've got a proposal out now about a White House Office for Children and Youth. We really did in 1994 set the table for the White House Office for Children and Youth, then called the President's Crime Prevention Council, that brought all of those agencies together around the table to say, some of you are about punishment, some of you are about prenatal care, you run the gamut, but you're all about really making sure young people are on a path towards success. How do we shape this into a philosophy that we can then use to knit these federal programs together? We will get some of our colleagues from the forum on the calls in subsequent months. We're going to sort of keep this dialogue going for a little bit to talk about how some of these ideas that got planted have pulled through. So we're coming back to talk about a White House office. It took us 20 years to get something called the Performance Partnership Pilots pulled together, which really demonstrated that if you really gave local communities the incentive to knit these things together, they would actually pick up that, not with a huge amount of money, but just with the opportunity to take these things that they know are pieces of a puzzle and be able to put them together to say, this is what we need to craft to get to outcomes. So, you know, it's been a long journey to get to here. But we came out of the Crime Prevention Council and said, now what? We had gotten these ideas of youth development seeded. We had really gotten the ideas about youth development used to galvanize what we now talk about as after school and out of school and community programs. And so the next journey was just to say, how do we get those ideas into other systems? So the Forum for Youth Development and Policy Research stayed behind, and we set up, and the Center for Youth Development and Policy Research stayed behind, and we set up the Forum for Youth Investment to really continue to move these ideas out into what we have been referring to for a while as the allied youth fields. So a long journey of trying to pick up these ideas and look for opportunities to plant them. sometimes more in a think tanky research mode, sometimes more in a policy space, certainly with the Weichert Center moving these ideas into practice. It's been a journey.
Yeah, so I want to stay with the forum journey here in just a little bit, but it's interesting, I think, between the Center for Youth Development and the Forum for Youth Investment, the number of different ways that, I was in ride along mode, but the number of different ways that you tried to move this idea of youth development, right? So we had it in the federal government, coordinating across all the different departments. That was a year, relatively short-lived at that point in time. Going to International Youth Foundation and really learning about the policies in other countries and how folks actually had youth policies, not just a fragmentation, and bringing that back in. Kind of the President's Summit and getting America's Promise up and going, sort of a key leader that was a champion for the effort, and working with that, supporting a funders group, the Youth Development Funders Group, and staffing that for a while. And then at some point, it just came to, but maybe we should create the forum. And I would say, like, each of those things was somewhere along about a year of attempting and trying them. I remember I was there, but I'm just curious how you would say, like, why did we land on the idea of the forum? And it was the Forum Collective for Youth Investment, not youth development specifically. Why did we land on that idea? And then I'm going to add to that question, like, why did we land on it? And then what was it that as you navigated the next decade of twists and turns, how did you try to hold true to that idea with an increasingly varied organization?
Well, I mean, I'll answer the almost last question first, which is, I think the thing that we say consistently is we stay youth-centered versus system-centered. As long as we keep young people in the middle of the picture, and we draw a lot of pictures, but as long as we keep young people in the middle of the picture, whether we're going into policy or practice, et cetera, and as long as we understand that in order to really support youth success and make sure young people are thriving, we have to have an acknowledgement of the ecosystem. Now, we haven't always used the ecosystem language. It's coming back now with more precision as we're really understanding what we mean by ecosystems, but it has always been the idea that if we put young people at the middle and we fully understand what it takes to support development, academic, civic, social, emotional, physical, spiritual, all of those kinds of development, vocational, if we understand that that's the goal, then first of all, we have to really make sure that everybody who works with young people understands that. Second, we really have to make sure that systems or even organizations which are set up to be accountable for particular things really understand that their first job is to do no harm, that by focusing on one thing, they can't focus so exclusively on that thing that they actually undermine overall development. So it's just been keeping that idea front and center, and then really looking for opportunities to push those ideas wherever there seems to be a softened wall. And interestingly, when we started the Forum for Youth Investment, the energy was in juvenile justice reform and child welfare reform and youth employment and alternative services. Those were the folks who were interested in saying, these ideas seem to resonate with us. And most importantly, they resonate with the young people. When we actually have the courage as adults to talk to young people, not from a deficit model, but to talk about their assets, their aspirations, to try to figure out where they're going, to ask them questions. As soon as we bring this sort of youth development assets approach in, it actually seems to make a difference. We got champions in those other systems. What was interesting was that we didn't get a lot of uptake with K-12. Except around people who were running alternative schools. We got it around the edges, we got it around the margins, but we didn't get it in the core of K-12, in large part because they already thought they were doing learning and development and doing it their way. So, when I think about why we set up the Forum for Youth Investment, and you definitely were not just there, you were a co-founder of it. It was very intentionally because coming out of the President's Crime Prevention Council, we really saw opportunities to move these ideas into those other systems. We also saw opportunities to really begin to take them from ideas actually to implementation and impact, which, and then if we sort of tell the story, the Center for Youth Program Quality came along because of a very intentional opportunity to begin to say, we can't just talk about youth development and get people going, I think I do it. How do they know if they're doing it? They don't know if they do it, if they don't have standards, they don't have ways to assess their practice, if they don't have ways to really improve their practice in a way that connects the dots between those. So some of those ideas got started and planted, and we continue to do them along the way. But what's exciting now is that we've got K-12 folks.
I'm going to come back to that K-12 question just a second, because I know our colleague Bethany Little over at the at Ed Council and the Soul Alliance talks about the softening of the walls that's happening right now. But before we get there, I'm going to do two things. One, we're coming more into the present day, folks. So if there are questions that you want to drop into the chat or things that you're thinking about what's happening now that you want Karen to reflect on a little bit with us, please add those into the chat. I do. As I'm just hearing you talk, Karen, think about one of the other ways I've heard people describe you over the years, and that is
only the positive ones. Only the positive.
Only the positives, and it is really it's sort of the definition of a social entrepreneur. There have been the forum as we started it sort of had a core set of ideas that we were thinking about how to move, and as you just mentioned before the call, folks when they got the invite for this probably saw a lot of little logos across the bottom of the page. Can you offer any advice to folks who are trying to move their big idea about how you've navigated that over the years, starting this organization, and with how have you kind of assessed and navigated the different opportunities and kind of twists along the way that led us to where we are now?
Sure. And it's a good thing to reflect on because there are a lot of caveats in this story. The first thing that I will say is that I really am an idea person. I have ended up starting and leading and leaving a lot of things along the way. But my measure of success was always whether the idea stuck, not whether I stuck around. And so my intent was not to just sort of move myself professionally from one job to a bigger job to a bigger job, but to really look for those opportunities to plant the ideas and stay as long as it looked like it made sense to have them. Because I learned early on, you have a lot more opportunity to actually plant and move ideas and be nimble if you don't actually start your own organization. I really thought I was going to live out my entire career without starting an organization. So everything up until then was inside of somebody else's organization, inside of CDF, inside of the Academy for Educational Development, inside the White House, inside the International Youth Foundation. It really wasn't until this last time when the thing that we grew inside of the International Youth Foundation got to be half the size of that organization that we really needed to sort of pull it apart and find a way to do that. There's a story about how we even did that in collaboration with another organization. That was sort of our first merger, was to merge with an organization called Community Impact, which we then sort of absorbed and made into the forum. But once we started an organization, that same entrepreneurial spirit was still there of like, how do you keep the ideas moving? And so I think in a lot of ways, one of the things that happened was people knew we were the idea people. We came to a lot of tables to bring these ideas in the same way that we've talked about it. And when there was an opportunity to actually move those ideas towards impact, people either asked us to join or frankly asked us to take over things that they no longer could run. And so if you look at that, you talked about the logos across the bottom. We started the Children's Cabinet Network with NGA and with NCSL, the National Conference of State Legislatures, and ran that for a while. And then, as membership organizations, when that idea waned, we kept that going. And then made a local Children's Cabinet Network that we now run with the Education Redesign, I didn't say it right. Is that Education Redesign?
Education Redesign Lab.
Education Redesign Lab at Harvard, and the Children's Funding Project, which was a spinoff from the forum. Spark Action, for those who remember, was Connect for Kids. And when that organization sort of left things behind, we said, well, there's a whole lot of energy here around having a platform that's not just about one issue, but it's really about the range of issues that we have to look at. Let's get that and grow it. When Opportunity Nation, and the story goes on and on. So if you look at the logos across the bottom, they are all either connected to an idea, connected to an entity. The Readiness Projects is the last that I'm going to connect to, I expect, but it probably won't be the last for the forum, because I think the entrepreneurial spirit that started the forum is going to stay on long after I leave. I think it's sort of ingrained into who the forum is. So we aim for quality. We never aimed to become huge, but we do aim to be useful. And one of the ways that we can be useful is basically to take risks. They don't always pan out, and they're not even always fun, but I think they're always important.
No, and sometimes they're not, and they're also not always funded. I think that's another part of it, right?
Some are funded, yes.
So if we came back to the softening of the walls, as you were saying, kind of around the conversations with our education partners, really starting a few years back within the National Commission on Social Emotional Academic Development, where you were a commissioner. We're both governing partners with the Science of Learning and Development Alliance. And in the early days of that, it was another one of those, like many of these things were over the years, it was sort of a nights and weekends commitment. And then the funding kind of followed a little bit for us to play the roles that we did. But I'm wondering if you, as we kind of bring it up to present day and talk about things, and I want to give a shout out in chat. I see the note about the Interagency Working Group on Youth Programs, which is another one of those in continuing efforts, and we've had the privilege of being able to connect and support some of that work over the years. But the kinds of things that are continuing in terms of those ideas, and that one is in the federal government. Just what you're seeing right now in terms of the difference in these last few years across, as we say, the allied youth fields, but of really having a conversation with our education partners in a different way. What do you think that opportunity is now, and how is this last year, how's 2020 really kind of even shaken that up even more?
I mean, the opportunity to work with our K-12 partners is huge, and I think, at least in my lifetime, unprecedented. And I mean that, again, not that we couldn't always find willing individuals and even willing individual systems inside of K-12, but really having the whole conversation about public education, the whole conversation sort of be ready to really sort of look at academics plus. And so you even see it in the progression of the language, from social emotional learning to social emotional and academic development. How do we integrate social emotional learning into academic? To the science of learning and development, which just says, hey, everything that we know tells us learning is social and emotional. Learning is about meaning making. Meaning making only happens when young people feel emotionally safe and socially connected to the people, peers and adults, that are in this space with them who are having these experiences. So we can't separate these things. We just can't separate them. And we can't predict where the most meaningful learning is going to happen, because learning isn't just about academics. Those messages were already being brought in to schools. Again, people playing the long game like Castle. You know, we have absolutely benefited from the inroads, the very strategic inroads that the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning made into schools. But I would say we, and by we, I mean sort of the broader youth development community, has also had a hard time putting our hands up and saying, but we knew those lessons and we've actually scaled those lessons over here in these other spaces. Wouldn't you like to see what we've done? And early on with, the Center for Youth Development and Policy Research, we tried to sort of have these conversations between the systems. And the disparities between the systems were just so great. And the focus on academics and formal learning versus sort of enrichment and all the ways that we've come to describe what happens in youth and community programs, it was very hard to get those conversations happening systemically. There was absolutely no doubt that you found individual teachers and youth workers who found common ground, that you found individual classes, that you found things in school that were operating using youth development principles, and also vice versa, that you found folks out in the after-school space really trying to do academics in the same way that it was happening in schools. But what's happened over the past couple of years is the presence and the leading with understanding how learning happens has really created the common space for us to have these conversations. And then with COVID, literally the walls fell down. I mean, all of a sudden, out of school time was all the time, as we said in the blog that we wrote back in, when it happened, in April. And all of the things that really happen in school, if school is really being the kind of school that I experienced, yes, it was rich and rigorous academic content, but it was also relationships with peers and adults, and really rich relationships within a diverse set of young peers and adults of all ages and abilities, et cetera. It was the comfort of routines. It was having extracurricular activities. I went back and looked at my yearbook just to make sure that I wasn't looking through rose-colored glasses. I found my high school yearbook and I counted, and 95% of the young people who were in the yearbook had at least 2 extracurricular activities after their name. The expectation was, you may not be a genius, but you can participate in something. And you're going to find the thing that gives you a spark and you're going to do it, whether it's the Latin club or cheerleading or whatever. It really was an incredible experience. And that's the kind of thing that we now have a deeper understanding that that's what young people need to have. And I think we have an unprecedented opportunity to really make that happen, because school couldn't happen the way school normally happened. Young people suddenly were at home. Youth organizations and community organizations were standing up. Those people in schools, the bus drivers, the cafeteria workers, the social workers, the psychologists, got to step to the forefront, not just be there if kids got into trouble or just move them back and forth, from a sort of a technical perspective as they're in between classes, but they really got to stand up often as people who had deeper relationships with young people. So we know something happened to really sort of upset the apple cart enough that people were moving at lightning speed to make stuff up, but a lot of good stuff was happening. And now our job, as we're sort of going into summer and thinking, we're going to have herd immunity and eventually the end is in sight, it's not just that we shouldn't go back to normal, or we can't go back to normal because we've seen normal doesn't work for everybody. It really is even that we should build forward together, which is what we're talking about. And we'll talk about that with you more later on when it's your turn to talk. It really is that we need to just rethink these words that we use. And those of you who know me know I've never been a fan of talking about after school time and out of school time, not because we don't tend to operate after school and summer, but because defining an entire important part of the learning ecosystem with the adjectives that just tell us where and when learning happens, but they don't really put front and center how and why and with whom learning happens, means that it's an uphill battle. And there was a piece this morning, even I woke up to NPR, and there was a piece this morning on school leaders saying, maybe we should just start school early and start school in the summer. Well, if you're a school leader and you can say, why don't we just start school in the summer? That means that you don't understand that for many kids, summer has learning experiences that actually complement school and that are important to have. And so that's the kind of thing that we have to still work on. But the opportunity to do it is there in a way that it wasn't before, that we can have that conversation and we can say those things. That's an opportunity that got started with SEL and SEED and SOLD, and now really can be brought to the forefront just because of the opportunities that we've had because of COVID. So yes, the walls are softened, and I'm reading the quotes. I'm not quite sure this is when you do remodeling when the walls are softened, but I agree. This is the time to actually step in there and do it. And I would say in that space, and then I'll give it back to you, Rita, it isn't just that schools need to not think that nothing happens in summer. It's that community organizations need to understand that what they do doesn't only happen in summer and after school, but we're going to have to come together to be a lot more articulate and a lot bolder in talking about how the things that we do really can be used to create a different picture of how learning and development can happen. So that when we use terms like expanded day and expanded year and expanded learning, the assumption behind it isn't just we're expanding what happens in the school building out. It really does mean we are letting the walls down and sort of mixing things up.
So I know that one of the things that we've been talking about is just how you're going to have more time to do exactly what you just did, and think about, like, how are we framing this? How are we thinking about things like summer? How do we even talk about it? And I really was curious to see if we would get through the full hour without you saying. So I was listening to the story on NPR this morning. Since I will say, like, I will let you all in on a little secret. She does this often at dinner with her husband, and he says, "Oh, yes, 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 I'm sure you did." And then they skip to the next topic. But Karen is an avid listener in the mornings. And I know this morning she was, because I got the text message at 6:30 this morning about the story she was just speaking about. Because it is so present. It is so, and it is so pressing. So Karen, with that, there's some questions coming in the chat. I've got a few more for you. But as we shift to now, could you just share with folks a little bit what you're thinking about, both like why now and what now, as you're thinking about how to direct your energies in this next phase?
Yeah, I basically figure when you're almost 70 years old, you really should get to do what you want. And what I want to do is to sort of crank the clock back. The forum's tagline is moving ideas to impact. The thing that I think we have done well, and by we, I really mean we, and I'm very excited about making sure that you all have an opportunity to get to hear from, Thaddeus Berger and his team. And I just want to basically say right now, Thaddeus is not nearly as old as I am, isn't as old as Rita, but Thad has been with us for how many years, Rita?
He was present at the creation. It was 98. Yeah.
Yeah. And was with us as an intern at the President's Crime Prevention Council in the White House. So we have people who have been doing this a long time. And we're going to just sort of hear how they're going to keep all of those logos going across the top of the page moving, or the bottom of the page, as we're sort of taking these ideas out into impact. And one of the things that happens when you move ideas to impact is you do have to settle in on the ideas. You have to sort of test them, curate them, figure out which ones stick, figure out which ones have the best horsepower for moving things forward, and then move out, into how you're going to really influence and impact. Once you do that, it's hard and sometimes a little bit scary to come all the way back over to the idea space and go, I wonder if we should just reframe, rethink, readjust our priorities about some of these ideas. I want to have the freedom to do that. That does not mean, you've heard this. We have been playing with these ideas for a long time. We've been curating these ideas for a long time. The staying power across all of the logos that you have at the bottom of the forum page, and across all of the logos that represent where I've been and where Rita's been on the past 25 plus years with me, is that we continued to take and curate the ideas. But right now, we have an opportunity to do that at such a rapid pace, to bring in all of the science of learning and development and make sure it's not just the science of learning and development as it applies to education, but it's the science of learning and development that applies to adolescence, that applies across all systems, that really is pushed and prodded to make sure that we're understanding the research and the science behind it in a way that really is important and appropriate for all young people, Black and brown young people, rural and urban young people. We have to do that. And it's a lot of work. And it also happens to be fun, and it also happens to frankly be what I like to do the best. So it's not that I don't love being an entrepreneur. It's not that I don't love running an organization that by design is probably more complicated than it perhaps should need to be. But in order to do justice to the ideas, it just wasn't fair to pretend that I had time to do both. So I picked the fun one. And I did that because I'm really confident, one, that the executive team that we have will keep all of these balls moving and move them forward together in ways that I probably couldn't imagine and necessarily didn't have the energy to do. But B, that this is what's going to actually keep me going for another 10 years. It's not running an organization. It's really having the time to think, okay, I heard that story. Let me follow up and find out where those ideas are going. Let me pick up the phone and call 3 people and find out what's going on and see what I can do to be helpful, to make sure that those ideas are really getting grounded back in the rich history of what we have in education and youth development and the science of learning and development. So that's why I'm gonna not slow down, but well, let's call it rewiring. I think it is kind of like rewiring a house.
And it is, yeah, we're going to get the house analogy in a minute. But it is unleashing more energy. And it's one of the reasons why we're excited. And I'm going to say for the range of you who are on the call that have been a part of the work with the Readiness Projects, and for those who haven't, I think Catherine's in the link, find out more about it. Is that Karen is devoting a huge chunk of her time sticking with us with Hal Smith at National Urban League, Deb Moroney and David Osher, American Institutes for Research, and the team here at the Forum, and all of the co-strategists in the Readiness Projects to really continue in this like sharpening the ideas work. And how do we sharpen and amplify those ideas? How do we get them beyond our usual circles? What is that going to take to be able to do that? So those are all the kinds of things that are, as we have been dreaming a little bit together about her next phase, how to be able to stay connected with the work and have time to be able to do that as well. Yeah. I was going to go to a couple of questions, Karen, but is there anything else you want to say on that?
I see 2 questions in the chat, or 2 comments in the chat, really.
One around the federal, one was around the, since we were talking about education, this idea of remodeling. Is it remodeling or is it really transforming? Can you speak to that? Because I know that's been a big part.
Both of those. And if while I'm doing that, since I know Catherine or Merita, you're both very swift, the quote that, which is not my quote, but the quote that we use to sort of kick off the community as context paper, if one of you could find that and we could even just sort of end by sharing the screen with that, that would be great. So Della, hi Della, wonderful to see you. Absolutely. I think we are not about just remodeling. This isn't just a new paint job that we need, or even take a couple of walls down. We do need to restructure education. And Phyllis, to your point, absolutely. When I said the expanded day and expanded year, that was really referencing the fact that, and I've written about this for the past 10 years and it's now coming true, that because of the language that we have used to talk about after school and summer, it's easier for school folks, and I mean this with all respect to school folks, to think, oh, if it's just about more time, we can just expand into those spaces and bring stuff in. Not recognizing that there are organizations and entities and things happening in those spaces that are not just complementary to what happens during the school day. Some of them are directly compensatory to what happens during the school day because they're undoing damage that was done in, as Della says, a predominantly white European, centric paradigm. So we know that, but the point is we know that. What we have an opportunity to do, I think, is going to take a little bit of sort of tough patience on our part to meet education folks where they are as these walls soften, but bring them forward. I mean, if whether we think we're building a parallel system or a new system, and we're in conversations with groups that are primarily K-12 groups that are talking about both. Parallel, do you create a parallel system because you have to dismantle them? The challenge that folks are asking is, how do you do that? How do you get to blank slate at scale? We can do blank slate around the edges with, sort of boutique schools, et cetera, but how do we get to blank slate at scale? How do we even, sort of look at terms like learning loss and say, not everybody lost learning. Some kids weren't going to learn even if you had them in the building the whole time. Some young people actually gained more, and we can tell you the stories of what happened because they were actually put into a more supportive environment that met them where they are and moved forward. We know we have a whole lot of stories to tell that really can get to that blank slate, but a blank slate is really, really scary if you're a school district and you're accountable for a whole bunch of stuff, not just a whole bunch of money, but a whole bunch of stuff. And those are the conversations that I think we have to be in. Again, having more things to read, I will find this and drop it into the information that you get later on. But it wasn't NPR, but it was a newsletter that came from Education Reimagined yesterday that was quoting another piece that essentially said, in order to really dismantle a system, you have to take the time to get to know the system so you know what you're taking apart. And I think that's what we have an opportunity to do here, to have people really get inside and dig into the education system, much like in earlier years, we got inside and dug into the juvenile justice system. We have to get inside and dig into this system, and it's going to be harder because they thought they were all about learning and development. They didn't think they were hurting kids. We have to get in there and figure out how to dismantle it in ways that we can put the new pieces back together. So everybody on this call, absolutely hold me accountable, hold us accountable. This is our opportunity to actually make this stuff happen at scale. I don't exactly know what it's going to mean to do it, but by no means am I backing away from it. And sometimes when I part of being entrepreneurial is sort of knowing, which language to use in which space while holding yourself absolutely accountable to the same high goals and seeing if you can move people along. I think that's what I did when I joined the Seed Commission 4 years ago. People were like, that's a long shot. You're not going to get anything into that group. We did. So the ideas are there, the goals are there, and I think we have more opportunity than ever to be able to move this forward. And then Phyllis, just to your point, remember, I'm not exiting. So I've got more time to figure out how to grab these words and challenge people to use them correctly.
We also had I'm going to put one more question in there and resource, and I think that Ian wants to do a couple of things to wrap us up, but I think it was Shelley Metzenbaum way back in the chat had a question really about, isn't this the time at the federal level to do the kind of cross-agency coordination? So there's both this opportunity, as you're saying, with education, and then it feels like there's a different opportunity as well as we come into this new year with the new administration to really set priorities and kind of keep things going as well in terms of that. And I just, as I tee up that question, Karen, it reminds me of the conversation we've just been having in the last couple of weeks of the need to kind of, we've gone back and looked at the unfinished business reflections on further reflections on a decade of promoting youth development. And that was 20 years ago that we did with Thaddeus, that you and I did with Thaddeus way back a while ago. That really was laying out what's a comprehensive agenda if we're really trying to move this, and now is the time. I'm just curious if you have closing thoughts on what it's really going to take. As you often will say, like the power that we carry collectively, the folks that we have on the call today, the others that we're connecting with across the fields, what is really needed in the federal landscape at this time?
Yeah, we're going to have to get it in there and push it. But I think the work that the forum and others have been doing, we weren't even leading it, but sort of having to do it to really call for a White House office, to call for an Office of Children and Youth, to not just have it be an office that sort of hosts conferences, but really develops a cross-agency agenda that develops and elevates the strong point of view that the Interagency Working Group has put out there. I mean, it is a very strong, very clear commitment to a youth development approach. But we need education to be a strong partner in this with us, because we can't continue to think that what we do is we first fix kids and then we develop them. We fix them and then they can learn. We understand the dynamic between those. And so continuing to have the separation of all these other agencies do wraparound services or enrichment things, but it's just the schools who do the important learning. We have to get in there and change that. And so if we can do that from the beginning, really getting the science of learning and development and the science of adolescence. And I'm going to keep pushing on adolescence because that's really the place for us to best test out all these ideas. And that's the place where, 40 years ago, we learned that the deficit policies really come into full bloom for adolescents and young adults. So I think we've got an opportunity to do it. We need to put those mechanisms in place, but we can't just end there. We have to hold them accountable for creating these agendas, and we have to use all the existing mechanisms that we have, like the interagency work group, like the fact that we already have the performance partnership pilots and legislation, like the fact that we have strong state children's cabinets across about half the states. We have a lot of things that we can use, but we shouldn't settle for just a comprehensive listing of the federal programs that are cross-referenced. We really got to figure out how to get to the heart of this, which is, how do you make sure what we know about child and youth development is at the heart of those programs, so that we are not doing harm?
And how are we thinking about it in a way that is really speaking to different groups of young people and the needs of really each and every young person? This is what it's all about. So you're not going anywhere.
No,
you're still hanging with us.
Yep.
You're going to keep these conversations going and keep the work going. With the Readiness Projects, as sort of creative director for our ideas work with the Readiness Projects, we're going to continue you're going to continue doing kind of changing the odds conversations, and continuing to keep that kind of medium site going and other things, so folks can stay tuned for that. We're going to continue having the Making the Invisible Visible series that we had in November, December. We're going to be continuing with that kind of panel discussion and breakout groups afterwards for people to really dig in. Those are kicking off again later this month. So this is, it is about ideas, but in terms of just real work that folks are doing, it's about how to bring those in and really embed them in a way that they make a difference. So we are so thrilled that you all have joined us here today. I think Ian has some closing wrap up for us with what's happening next. But Karen, thank you. I can't wait for you to just even read all the messages in the chat today. They're heartwarming, but I will say it has been a wild, uproarious, passionate, committed, get it done ride with you over the years, and I am thrilled that it's going to continue.
Well, I'm here, and I look forward to doing even more, writing even more, and hearing from you all even more. So same email address, keep comments coming. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you to you both. This was, as a 13-ish year veteran of the Forum for Youth Investment, I learned a great deal just about your journeys, and it was a real pleasure to be able to listen to this today, and very much appreciated, as I'm sure the rest of the audience does as well. Wanted to let you know about a few upcoming events. Karen will be kicking off the new Changing the Odds interview series sponsored by the Readiness Projects. The first session will be February 12th on transformative potential of community-based learner-centered ecosystems. That will feature Karen speaking with Kelly Young of Education Reimagined. And as both Karen and Merita have mentioned a few times, over the next several months, Karen will switch back into interviewer mode and host conversations with the Forum's executive team as they take the Forum forward into the next decade. So once again, thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.